Black CEO denied first-class seat. 5 minutes later, flight attendant fired on the spot publicly. The first thing Jamila Moore noticed was the subtle tension in the air as she walked toward the boarding gate. She had flown on this airline dozens of times, but today something felt off, something that couldn't quite be explained. As she approached the gate, she overheard a conversation between a flight attendant and a security officer. Jamila's pulse quickened. She didn't want to assume, but it was hard to ignore the chill that swept over her. For a moment, it felt as though the room had gone silent, and all eyes were on her. She smiled, trying to shake off the feeling of discomfort, but the unease only grew as she handed her ticket to the attendant. The woman behind the desk looked at the ticket, then up at Jamila with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the flight attendant said, her tone unexpectedly cold. "There seems to be a mistake with your seating. You're not actually assigned a seat in first class." Jamila's heart skipped a beat. This was a misunderstanding. She had purchased a first-class ticket weeks ago. But the attendant's icy demeanor left no room for negotiation. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about something much deeper, something Jamila had encountered all too often in her life, a cold, casual dismissal of her worth. And in that moment, Jamila realized that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a much larger problem that had followed her throughout her career. Jamila had worked hard to reach the heights she had in her career. As the CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, she had earned every bit of success, fighting against both corporate sexism and racial prejudice. She'd broken through glass ceilings that no one had believed she would. Her rise had been nothing short of extraordinary, but it hadn't come without its challenges. Every step she took forward, there were people who were quick to remind her of her place, as though the mere act of a black woman holding power was something to be resented. And now, here she was, standing at the gate of an airline she had flown with many times, being denied a seat that she had every right to be in. The moment she asked to speak to a manager, the flight attendant looked at her with an expression that was anything but apologetic. There was something deliberate about the way she spoke. It wasn't a mistake. This was no random error. Jamila had become a target for a reason, and she knew it wasn't just her ticket that was being scrutinized. It was her presence. This was no ordinary oversight. This was racial injustice in its most insidious form. The atmosphere on the flight seemed different too. The other passengers, most of whom had already boarded, seemed blissfully unaware of the tension that had just unfolded. Jamila took her seat in the waiting area, her frustration rising with each passing moment. The thought that she could have been treated with such disregard despite her success was almost too much to bear. It was a reminder of how deeply ingrained racial bias could be, even in spaces where people were supposed to be treated with the utmost respect. The flight attendant had asked her to sit in the back, a move that was both disrespectful and humiliating. Jamila could feel the weight of every stereotype that had been placed on her throughout her life, pressing down on her shoulders. She had been discriminated against before, but never like this, so public, so blatant, so unprovoked. As she sat there trying to keep her composure, Jamila realized this was not just an issue about a seat on a plane. This was about every moment she had ever felt pushed aside, overlooked, and told she didn't belong. The lack of apology from the flight attendant was telling. The complete disregard for the fact that she was a successful black woman made it clear that this wasn't a simple mistake. It was a reflection of a system that still saw people like Jamila as less than worthy of the same privileges that others took for granted. She could feel the anger building inside her, a familiar fire that she had learned to keep under control in her professional life. But something about the injustice of this moment felt different. This time, she wasn't going to let it slide. The flight attendant was called over by a manager, a middle-aged man who looked far too calm for the situation. Jamila watched as he calmly explained something to the attendant, who seemed to hesitate before responding. Jamila could feel the tension rising in her chest. As she overheard their conversation, it became clear that the flight attendant had made a conscious choice. She had singled out Jamila, using her race as a justification for treating her with disdain. It wasn't just that she had been denied a seat. It was the fact that she had been publicly humiliated, made to feel small in front of the other passengers, and treated as if her status as a black woman made her less deserving. The manager's indifference only fueled Jamila's resolve. This wasn't just a personal grievance. It was a matter of principle, a matter of respect that went far beyond her individual experience. Without hesitation, Jamila stood up and walked toward the counter. Her decision was made. She had been humiliated enough. She was done being silent. The airline, a company that had a duty to provide customer service, had failed in a way that no apology could fix. She would take her complaint further, and this time, there would be consequences. She demanded to speak to the higher-ups, to the corporate office, and to anyone who would listen. The manager's face drained of color as Jamila's voice grew louder. "This behavior will not be tolerated," she said firmly. "This is not just about a seat. This is about accountability, respect, and dignity, and I'm making sure everyone knows about this." As Jamila continued her verbal confrontation, she could see the flight attendant's hands begin to tremble. 5 minutes later, the flight attendant who had made the fatal error was called to the front by a senior member of the staff. Jamila's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. The flight attendant was being reprimanded in front of a crowded gate area. The public humiliation mirrored the shame that had been placed on Jamila just moments earlier. But this time, it wasn't Jamila who was being humiliated. It was the flight attendant who was being called out for her racial bias and disrespectful behavior. The senior staff member didn't mince words. "We cannot tolerate this behavior," he said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You are being dismissed from your duties immediately." The flight attendant's face turned crimson, her eyes wide with disbelief. Within moments, her uniform was taken and she was escorted out of the terminal. Her career with the airline officially over. Jamila stood there watching it all unfold, knowing that her decision to stand up for herself was about far more than just her. It was about every black professional, every person of color who had ever been discriminated against, who had ever been overlooked, and who had ever been made to feel less than. As the flight attendant was led out of the terminal, Jamila felt a sense of justice. The battle wasn't over, but for now, this moment was a small victory. A reminder that even in the face of discrimination, it was possible to fight back and demand respect.